The first time I heard the name, I thought it was nothing more than a whisper of gossip, a half-truth exchanged in the dim corner of a bar. But whispers have a way of curdling into storms, and by the time the story reached me, it was no longer a rumor, it was a warning. They said the man carried secrets the way other men carried scars, hidden beneath layers but impossible to forget. They said he had something people would kill for, and they said, above all, that trusting him was like walking barefoot across broken glass, certain that blood would follow every step. I should have listened. I should have walked away before the first word was spoken, but once a thread is pulled, even the smallest one, it can unravel a life. I was not looking for trouble, not that night, not in that place, but trouble has a way of finding you, the same way a storm finds a lonely boat at sea. He slid into the chair across from me as if he owned the air between us. His eyes carried a gleam that was not joy, not madness, but something sharper, hungrier. He leaned forward, his voice low, and told me about a goldfish, not a pet, not something meant to amuse children, but a treasure, a myth given shape in gold and enamel, stolen years ago and hidden away. I could have laughed, brushed him off, told him I had no time for fairy tales, but his words dug beneath my skin like hooks. And I found myself asking the question I should never have asked, where is it now? He smiled at that, a smile that promised both ruin and riches. He spoke of a house on a quiet street, of a woman who had once been beautiful and was now dangerous, of locked drawers and whispered oaths. Every detail he offered only deepened the trap. And though my instincts screamed that nothing good could come from chasing a story so drenched in shadows, my pride was louder. Pride, and maybe curiosity, the kind that poisons before you even realize you've swallowed it. The next night I stood on that quiet street, the kind of place where the curtains never moved, yet you felt eyes on you all the same. The woman opened the door before I even knocked, as though she had been waiting for me. She wore her years like armor, every wrinkle sharpened into defiance, every glance a test. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old secrets. I asked her about the goldfish, and she laughed. Not kindly, but with a bitterness that felt like broken glass underfoot. She said men had died for less. She said the ones who chased it never lived long enough to enjoy what they found. Her warning should have ended it. Instead, it pulled me deeper. What is it about danger that makes us lean closer instead of turning away? Is it arrogance, thinking we are stronger than those who fell before us? Or is it the truth that we crave the fire, even when we know it will burn us? I don't know. All I knew was that by the time I left her house, I was in it. Not just the hunt for a trinket, not just the chase for money or glory, but a labyrinth of lies, betrayals, and old debts waiting to be paid in blood. The days that followed blurred into one another. Each lead I followed brought me closer to the heart of the storm, and each face I met carried the same look, the mixture of fear and greed that only true temptation inspires. I began to wonder if the goldfish even existed, or if it was simply a story crafted to pull men like me into the undertow. Yet every closed door, every muttered denial, every half-truth I clawed from reluctant lips pointed toward something real, something hidden. And the closer I came, the more the shadows thickened around me. One night, as the city slept and the rain painted rivers across the pavement, I found myself standing outside another door. This one did not open easily. It resisted, as though the house itself wished to keep its secrets. When it finally yielded, The air inside was colder, sharper, filled with the weight of things unsaid, and there, on a table scarred by time, I saw it a small box, ordinary in every way, but one the lock was new, too new for a house so forgotten. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the silence pressing against my ears like a scream, waiting to be released. Was this it? Was the goldfish finally within reach? Or was this just another trap in a city built on them? I never found out that night, because before I could break the lock, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and much too close. The footsteps behind me did not hurry. They came steady, deliberate, like the slow ticking of a clock in a quiet room. I turned, and the figure that filled the doorway was small, wiry, with eyes that had seen too much of prison walls. He called himself Pierre, a man whose past was stitched with forgeries and mistakes, but whose voice carried the faint echo of something bigger knowledge. He spoke of Cy Wally, the thief who had once taken everything but never revealed where the pearls had gone. Pierre said Cy had whispered in drunken fits of Idaho hillsides and shallow graves. He said the man lived still, somewhere to the north, tucked into the shadows of Washington state, hiding not just from the law but from his own past. And Pierre, for all his thin shoulders and jittering hands, swore he knew the truth. I listened, not because I trusted him, but because the hunger for answers had already rooted itself inside me. Pierre wanted a partner, someone who could deal with insurance men if the pearls were ever brought to light. What he really wanted was protection, though he never said it. Men who carried secrets that large never slept easy, and his eyes darted at shadows as though they were all waiting their turn to come for him. I agreed to meet him later, though even then I knew there was something fragile in his story, something that might break under the weight of the first hard truth. When I arrived at his room, the silence was wrong. The air carried the burnt tang of scorched cloth and something darker. Pierre lay on the bed, tied at the ankles and wrists, his feet charred by an iron left to burn too long. His eyes were wide, staring into nothing, the gag still wet in his mouth. Shock, or pain, had carried him away before his torturers could squeeze out the secret. On the floor lay scattered bills, a metal box spilling traces of cocaine, the detritus of a life wasted and then brutally ended. I shut off the iron, wiped the places I had touched, and left the house with a knot in my throat. Whatever trail Pierre had uncovered was worth killing for, and I was already walking it. Back at the hotel lobby, Kathy Horn tried to keep her face smooth when I told her, but her eyes betrayed her fear, sorrow, maybe guilt. She asked me what to do, and I told her to play dumb, to keep her distance from the story of pearls and blood. She nodded, her mouth a thin line, and I could see the war inside her between the loyalty she still carried for her jailed husband and the hope that this madness might give her a future. It was too late for Pierre. Maybe too late for Cy Wally, too. But the pearls, if they still existed, were dragging us all closer to the undertow. I needed clarity, so I went to the insurance men. Their office was shabby, like a giant too rich to care about appearances. The manager, a bald man named Luton, listened with the calm of someone who had heard every kind of lie before. He told me the reward still stood $20,000 now, not $25,000, but he doubted anyone would ever collect it. He said pearls like those did not lie buried for decades, waiting for the right man to come along. They vanished, slipped into hidden markets, sold and resold until they became invisible. Yet he didn't laugh me out the door. He promised quiet cooperation, as though part of him wanted to believe the impossible might still be true. I left with his chuckle echoing in my ears, knowing I had just stepped deeper into a game where every player wore a mask. The phone rang not long after. A woman's voice, cool and sharp, told me to meet a lawyer named Rush Matter. She mentioned sore feet, and I knew she was tied to Pierre's murder, curiosity or folly. I went. Matter's office reeked of desperation beneath its lawyerly trappings. He tried to play dumb, but sweat ran down his face faster than his words. He admitted he knew of Pierre, admitted there were others hunting for the pearls, but danced around the truth like a man afraid of stepping on glass. He poured whiskey, switched glasses on me, and smiled too wide. The drink burned wrong, heavy with poison. I swung, dazed, with the sap in my hand, and left him slumped against his desk, only to stumble into the cold smile of a woman with gray eyes and a pistol, Carol Donovan. She was young, hard, the kind of woman who could smile while she cut a man in half with her words. She told me to lie down and let the drug do its work. The last thing I remember was her laugh as the room spun away from me. When I woke, night had fallen, and the office was a wreck, drawers emptied, papers scattered, bottles broken. I staggered to my feet, head pounding, and knew the game had shifted again. Kathy's call came soon after, her voice thin with fear. She said the police had been through her place, that strangers knew my name, that a dark-haired girl had spoken of towns in the north. The net was tightening, and every thread led to the same conclusion: the pearls still existed, and those who believed in them would kill until they were found. I booked a night plane for Olympia, Washington, carrying nothing but a sore head, a growing thirst, and the faint hope that the truth was waiting for me somewhere in the shadows of the Northwest. Olympia lay quiet under a gray sky, its streets lined with old wood and stone, the air heavy with the smell of pine and salt water drifting up from Puget Sound. I took a room in a small hotel and walked until the town began to talk to me in its own way. The men on the street corners, with their long pipes and their watchful eyes, spoke in silence first. Then one of them, a wiry old man, plucking at the hair in his nose, muttered about a stranger up on a hill, a man who kept goldfish. I laid $1 on my knee, and another man spat in the dirt, pointing toward a house that gleamed yellow and white against the dark line of trees. Even in their half-spoken words, I heard what I needed. Cy Wally was alive, hiding in plain sight under another name, and still surrounded by whispers of goldfish. Before I went up the hill, I let myself be pulled into a smoke-filled pool hall on the edge of town. There, I met a gaunt man with close-set eyes and the kind of expression that gave nothing away. He called himself Sunset, though it was clear the nickname had been earned in prison yards, not wide-open skies. He spoke of Pierre, of Carol Donovan, of Rush Matter, and he watched me with suspicion that could cut glass. The password Goldfish loosened him, but not enough. He wanted to know how much I knew, how deep I was in. I told him Pierre was dead, tortured until his heart gave out. Sunset hardly blinked, but when he finally spoke, it was with the name I had been waiting for. Cy, hiding in Westport, far out on the spit of land where the Pacific pounded the shore. I should have been careful with him. I should have walked away. But in stories like this, every ally is also a threat, and I let Sunset follow me into the shadows. It wasn't long before the door of my hotel room rattled under new hands, Carol, Donovan, and Rush Matter stepping through with guns leveled. Sunset's eyes lit up, and for a moment the whole room was nothing but nerves and steel. Carol's smile was cold as she told me to reach for the ceiling, while Matter sweated behind his pistol like a man already halfway to hell. The air tightened, and I thought for sure bullets would write the ending then and there. But instead, the four of us struck a shaky truce, agreeing to ride together toward Westport, trust built on nothing but fear and greed. The house Sunset took us to was quiet, surrounded by tall trees and the low rumble of water beyond. He poured drinks with a steady hand, but when his Colt slid into view, it was clear the alliance had snapped. He accused Carol and Matter of torturing Pierre, of burning his feet to ashes. They didn't deny it. Matter whimpered and fumbled. Carol just smiled and reached for her hidden gun. The room erupted. Sunset dropped dead with a hole in his chest. Carol's gray eyes flashing like ice as she tried to finish me off. I kicked her weapon away and locked her in the bathroom. Matter collapsed in a drunken faint, and I left him bleeding on the floor, the stink of fear clinging to him like a second skin. Westport waited at the end of the road, a spit of sand and weather-worn houses clinging to the edge of the Pacific. I ate ham and eggs at a roadside shack, where the owner poured apple brandy too freely and talked too much about the town's history, with liquor smuggling. Between drinks, he pointed up the hill to the yellow and white house I had heard about from the old men. "That's Wallace," he said. "Keeps more goldfish than a man could count." My heart tightened. Wallace was Cy Wally, the thief who had held a secret longer than most men hold their breath. The house was neat, with flowers in the garden and a woman spraying aphids from her plants as if she had no idea she was living in a fortress of lies. She led me inside without suspicion, told me Wallace would see me upstairs, and there, beneath a slanted skylight, I found him, tall, gaunt, gray-browed, with eyes emptied of everything but the faintest trace of defiance. He held a goldfish in his hand, its fin ragged with fungus, and trimmed it carefully with a razor blade before dropping it back into a tank that glowed green with algae and light. The tanks surrounded us, a world of silent fish drifting in their glass prisons, the perfect camouflage for a man who wanted to forget the world outside. He admitted who he was, but not what he had done. He said he had a pardon from the White House itself, that he owed the world nothing, that he wanted only to be left alone with his fish. He said the pearls were gone, that he never had them, that someone else must have carried them into the dark all those years ago, but his eyes betrayed him, just a flicker. When I mentioned Pier and Sunset, when I spoke of others closing in, he was tired, yes, but not broken. He knew the storm was at his door, and then the footsteps came again, the same steady rhythm I had heard in that house before, now rising up the stairs with sharp voices behind them. Carol Donovan, Rush Matter, and behind them, Cy's wife, pushed forward at gunpoint. The room filled with steel and hatred. Carol's pistol glittered as she told Cy to lay down his weapon, and for the first time, I saw the old man falter. He set down his Colt, kicked it across the floor. For a moment, he seemed smaller, less dangerous, just a tired man who had run too far and too long. But the storm had broken, and blood was about to be spilled. Carol Donovan's eyes never left the old man as she tightened her grip on the pistol. Rush Matter lumbered to her side, his face flushed, his Smith & Wesson clumsy in his damp hands. Cy stood rigid, his shoulders hunched, the wide grin of a cornered fighter twisting his face. He had played the role of Wallace for years, hiding behind tanks of fish and a wife who believed or pretended to believe that peace was possible. But now the masquerade was over. The past had marched through his front door armed and merciless. Mrs. Cy collapsed into the corner, her knees trembling, her hands clawing at the air as though searching for something to hold. Her eyes were glassy, stunned, her body stiff with the shock of seeing her quiet sanctuary turned into a battlefield. Carol shoved her aside, the young woman's voice cool and sharp as steel. "That's enough, old man. Kick the gun clear." Cy obeyed slowly, his gaunt hand brushing the Colt across the boards until it came to rest near the center of the room. His eyes never left hers, though, and I could see the madness burning there. If two men had come through that door, he might have gunned them down without hesitation. But Carol's face, the youth, the cold ruthlessness disarmed him in a way bullets never could. Carol turned her aim on me next, her smile hardening into mockery. "You've got a knack for sticking your neck out, don't you? This time, you've gone too far." I raised my hands, forcing a grin, trying to keep her attention on me. I knew Mrs. Cy was inching forward on her knees toward the discarded Colt. If I could distract the girl a few seconds longer, it might be enough. I feigned arrogance, told her she was finished, told her her play was over. She lifted her chin, the barrel of her pistol steady, and then, with all the recklessness I had left, I lunged forward and cracked her on the jaw. Her shot grazed my ribs as she stumbled back, the sound deafening in the small room. She fell in slow motion, arms flailing, and in that instant, Mrs. Cy snatched up the Colt and fired. The bullet slammed into Carol's back, spinning her forward into me. Her body hit my chest, her eyes flashing wide with shock before the light drained from them. She crumpled at my feet, lifeless. The room froze for half a second, and then Rushmatter roared, swinging his revolver toward Cy. Cy grinned, a savage gleam in his deadened eyes, and charged. Bullets ripped into him, staggering his body, but still he came, swinging his massive frame forward until another shot slammed him against the table. He collapsed, blood pooling around him, yet the grin never left his gaunt face. I drew my own weapon and fired low, tearing into Matter's knee. He dropped as if struck by lightning, his howl filling the room as I cuffed him where he fell. Smoke drifted upward toward the skylight, mingling with the faint green glow of the tanks. Fish swam lazily through their glass prisons, oblivious to the carnage that had taken place around them. Mrs. Cy crawled to her husband's side, gathering his head into her lap. He wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips, but his grin softened as his gaze locked on her. His voice rasped through the gurgle of his final breath. "The Moors, Hattie, the Moors." His head slumped, the grin melted away, and silence claimed him. Mrs. Cy sat motionless for a long time, her hand resting on his chest, her eyes dry but burning. When she finally stood, she looked at me with a strange calm. "Help me carry him," she said softly. Together, we lifted his body to the bedroom, laying him gently on the bed. She folded his hands across his chest, drew the blinds, and sat beside him, her head bowed. "That's all," she whispered. "Thank you." I left her with her dead, closing the door behind me. But Cy's last words clung to me like smoke. The Moors. I went back to the fish room, my stomach tightening as I stared at the tank of black Chinese Moors in the corner. 4 of them waddled through the green water, their bulging eyes empty, their heavy bodies sluggish. Two swam near the surface, lively, but the others drifted near the bottom, slow and strange. My heart pounded as I reached for the long-handled strainer, scooping one up into the air. Its silver belly flashed, and there a faint line, a suture, a scar beneath the skin, a hard lump pressed against my fingers. With the razor blade still sticky from Cy's treatment of the sick fish, I cut carefully. The job was messy, sickening, but in minutes I held in my palm something small and heavy and shimmering with its own inner fire. A pearl, perfectly round, luminous, worth more than blood, more than life. I opened the other sluggish fish and found the twin, just as perfect, just as deadly. The Leander pearls, hidden in plain sight for nearly 20 years, tucked inside the bellies of goldfish that no one thought to question. I wrapped them in my handkerchief, my fingers trembling as I closed the cloth around them. $200,000 in treasure, $200,000 in blood and betrayal. Cy had carried his secret all those years, hiding it in living scapegoats, perhaps convincing even himself that they were nothing more than pets. His wife would later tell me he had once believed they were fake, that suffering had made them his, that he had chosen to bury his sins in the wilderness of his tanks. But I knew better. His last words proved it. He had never stopped guarding them, never stopped believing the pearls were his curse and his salvation. Downstairs, I called for the doctor and the police. The law would deal with matter. Cy would bury her husband in her own way. And me, I walked out into the coastal sunlight, the sound of surf pounding like a heartbeat against the shore, with the pearls heavy in my pocket and the weight of the dead heavier still on my soul. The cottage at Westport fell quiet once the echoes of gunfire faded. Matter groaned on the floor upstairs, bound and broken, while Mrs. Cy remained in the bedroom beside her husband's body. I sat for a long while on the porch, smoking and staring at the sea, the handkerchief heavy in my pocket. The pearls seemed to burn through the fabric, as though they knew they had been bought with 20 years of silence and a half-dozen fresh corpses. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt cold. The story of the Leander pearls had never been about wealth. It was about the way greed burrows into people until they are nothing but husks. Driven by obsession they can no longer control. When the town marshal finally arrived, his star glinting in the pale sun, I handed Matter over without ceremony. He tried to bluster, tried to paint himself as a victim, but the sight of Carol Donovan's body upstairs told the truth better than words. The marshal was a big man with quiet eyes, used to the occasional drunken fight, but not to scenes like this. He looked at me hard, then at the weeping wreck of Matter, and finally at Mrs. Cy, who stood on the porch with her shoulders straight, her face unreadable. She said little, only that her husband had fought to the end. The marshal did not argue. Perhaps he understood that a man can spend his life running from the law and still meet his judgment in his own home. I left Westport that evening, driving back toward Olympia with the surf fading behind me and the smell of salt giving way to the sharp tang of pine. The pearls rode in my pocket, heavier than any stone I had ever carried. I thought about Kathy Horn waiting in her cramped apartment above the cigar counter, her hope resting not on love or redemption, but on a small dream that when her husband walked out of prison, there might be money enough to keep him straight. It was a fragile hope, maybe foolish, but it was human, and in a story thick with lies and cruelty, it was the only thing that felt worth saving. Back in Los Angeles, I went to the insurance office. Luton's eyes widened when I laid the pearls on his desk, glowing faintly in the morning light. He touched them with delicate fingers, as if afraid they might vanish like smoke. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, $200,000 worth of headache finally put to rest. He chuckled, but the sound held no real humor. He signed the papers for the reward, $20,000, split the way I had arranged it, half for me, half for Kathy. The rest went back into the company's ledgers, as though all the blood spilled along the way could be balanced by neat rows of numbers. When I brought Kathy her share, her hands shook as she held the check. She tried to be tough, tried to act like it was just business, but her eyes betrayed her. They shone with a mixture of gratitude and fear, the kind that comes when a dream is finally within reach but might shatter with the next careless move. "Maybe this will hold him," she whispered. "Maybe Johnny will see it's a chance." I didn't answer. Dreams like that were brittle. But for once, I let her believe. It was all she had left. Later, alone in my office, I poured a drink and stared at the city outside my window. The pearls were gone, handed over to men who would lock them in a vault and write reports about their recovery. Cy was dead, his grin fixed forever in memory, his secret finally unearthed. Carol Donovan lay in a shallow grave of her own making, and Rush matter would limp through whatever justice the courts decided. The story had ended, but the questions it raised lingered like smoke. What makes a man guard a secret for 20 years, carving his guilt into living creatures, feeding them day after day, as though keeping them alive could redeem him? What makes a woman stand by that man, even when the world insists he's nothing but a thief? And what makes others chase after such treasures, knowing that even if they win, the prize will never truly belong to them? Maybe it's greed, maybe it's desperation, or maybe it's just the way people are built forever, reaching for something beyond their grasp, even when it burns them to ash. Cy had his goldfish. Kathy had her dream of a straightened-out husband. Carol Donovan had her hunger for power. And me, I had the habit of walking into storms that weren't mine and trying to walk out again with my skin intact. This time, I got lucky. Next time, who knows? I finished my drink and shut the office lights. The city was waiting outside, restless and indifferent, filled with 1,000 more secrets ready to spill into my lap. But for now, the case of the Leander pearls was closed, and all that was left was the memory of 2 shimmering stones, glowing like sins in the green water of a fish tank. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.